The war took my husband at Chickamauga, leaving me to raise our son alone. By 1868, I could turn away any drifter before he reached my porch. Then one arrived, thin as a fence wire, silence heavier than words. I meant to refuse him. He glanced at my boy and said, "Let me stay. I'll give your son the father war took." I left the barn door unlatched. By morning, nothing was the same. His name was Silas. He did not leave at dawn like the others who came begging for a meal. By the time the rooster crowed, he had already mended the broken fence gate without being asked. My son watched him from the kitchen window, eyes wide with a hope I had not seen since the letter came from Chickamauga. I wanted to trust it. I wanted to believe that a man who had walked 100 miles carrying nothing but a worn Bible and a cavalry pistol could be the answer to my prayers. But the Colorado Territory breeds a hard caution in a woman alone. A drifter offering to rebuild a family sounds less like providence and more like a trade I had not yet understood. The night before, his words still hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Now I had to decide whether opening my door meant opening my son's heart to healing or to a second loss we could not survive. By sunrise that first morning, I had already made my choice. A woman alone cannot stay alive on high Colorado land without hard decisions. Silas had slept in the barn with the bay horse he called Judgment. I stepped outside into the gray dawn and saw him already working. He had taken my husband's old axe from the chopping block and was splitting pine rounds I had not been able to move for 2 seasons. He worked with a steady rhythm, not the frantic labor of a man trying to impress. He worked like a man who knew exactly how long sorrow could keep a widow staring at an empty woodpile. Samuel stood at the fence, barefoot despite the frost. He had not taken his eyes off the stranger since he climbed out of the hayloft. That boy had been waiting for a father since the letter about Chickamauga arrived in the autumn of '63. He was only 4 then, too young to understand why his mama sat on the porch and tore open an envelope with hands that already knew the truth. My husband John had marched south with the Colorado Volunteers. He promised he would come back to teach Samuel how to ride a horse and shoot a rifle and read the scripture without stumbling over the hard words. He did not come back. He died on the 19th of September at Chickamauga Creek, along with 34,000 other men, left on a field in Georgia that I would never see. For 5 years, I had been mother and father and farmhand and hunter. The land gave just enough to keep us from starving. I traded eggs and butter for flour and coffee at the trading post 10 miles away. I guarded our cattle from wolves and rustlers with John's old Springfield rifle by the door. I taught Samuel his letters from a worn Bible with a bullet hole through the book of Psalms. Every spring another drifter came through the valley, some looking for work, some looking for trouble, most just looking for a warm meal and a woman to give it to them. I learned to read a man's shadow before he reached the porch. I learned which ones would leave peaceably and which ones required the weight of a rifle barrel to move along. So when Silas walked into our yard with his patched coat and his quiet gray eyes, I felt the old caution rise. He was different, but I could not yet name why. The first week, I kept my distance. I watched him from the kitchen window while he worked. He never asked for anything beyond what I offered. He slept in the barn every night and never came near the house after dark. He spoke to Samuel, but only when the boy approached him. He never touched him, never offered false affection. Yet by the 3rd day, my son was following Silas like a shadow, carrying small pieces of kindling, asking questions about the horse, about the pistol he carried, about the war. Silas answered gently, but I noticed he never said where he came from. He never mentioned his enlistment or his regiment. When Samuel asked if he had fought at Chickamauga, Silas went silent and stared at the mountains for a long time. "I fought in many places," he said at last, "but I won't speak of battles with a child." That should have comforted me. Instead, it pulled at something uneasy in my chest. I knew soldiers who had come home from the war. Some could not stop talking. Some could not start. But a drifter with a cavalry pistol and no history was a dangerous kind of man to let near your only child. By the end of the first week, the changes were impossible to ignore. The fence was repaired, the livestock watered, the woodpile stacked high enough for winter. Samuel had started carrying a stick like a rifle and marching behind Silas in a soldier's gait. One evening, I stepped out to call the boy for supper and saw Silas kneeling in the dirt, showing Samuel how to track deer prints in the soft ground. The man's hand guided the boy's little fingers along the grooves of the hoofmark. Samuel laughed, a sound I had not heard in years, a sound that cracked something open inside me. I wanted to be grateful. I wanted to believe that God had finally answered the prayer I had whispered every night since Chickamauga. But the territory teaches a woman hard lessons. Good things do not ride into the high country without a cost. Something always follows them. I began to notice small things. Silas kept his saddlebag locked and never opened it where I could see. When he slept in the barn, he always faced the door. His pistol was never more than an arm's reach away. Once, a traveler stopped on the road and asked for water. Silas stepped between the stranger and my son before I could even reach the porch. The traveler meant no harm, but Silas watched him until he was out of sight. That was the instinct of a man who expected danger to have a face and a name. I had seen that look before on wanted posters outside the sheriff's office in Denver City. Men who had done things they could not outrun. On the ninth evening, I finally asked him directly. We were standing by the corral as the sun dropped behind the peaks. The light was gold and cold, and the wind carried the smell of coming snow. "You never speak of before," I said. "You come to my door with a gun and a Bible and a promise to fill a dead man's place. But you don't tell me where you fought or why you're traveling alone or what you're running from." Silas looked at me for a long time, his gray eyes steady. "You're right to ask," he said. "A woman alone has a right to know what kind of man she has let into her home." He paused, then spoke slowly. "I fought in the war, and I did things I pray your son never has to do. I came west because the land I left holds more ghosts than I can carry. I meant to keep walking until I found a place so far from settlements that no one would ask my name. And then I saw your boy." He turned and faced me fully. "I saw the way he looked at me, and I saw the way you looked at him. You've been trying to be enough for him for 5 years, and the weight is crushing you. I offered what I had, nothing more. I wanted to believe him. I almost did. But that night, after he returned to the barn, I waited until the house was silent and crept outside. The moon was thin, and the wind covered my footsteps. I found his saddlebag in the dark corner of the stall where he kept his bedroll. The lock was cheap and broke with a single twist of the clasp. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were a set of papers. The first was a letter, creased and worn from years of handling. It was addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Silas Vance of the Confederate States Army, and it was written in a woman's hand. It spoke of a child, a daughter, who had died of fever while he was away at war. The second paper was a Union Army circular dated 1865, listing the name Silas Vance among a list of officers wanted for questioning in connection with the massacre of 11 civilian prisoners in Missouri. My hand went cold. I stood in the dark barn with the pages shaking in my fingers and listened to the sound of this man's breathing in the stall beside me. He was not just a drifter. He was a wanted officer of the defeated enemy. And I had let him teach my son how to shoot a gun. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark with the papers still clutched against my chest, listening to the wind batter the shutters and the steady creak of the frost-heaved boards. Samuel slept peaceful in the loft above me. In the barn, a man who might have murdered 11 civilians lay under my hay, and in my hand was proof that the Confederate States Army had trusted him with the rank of lieutenant colonel. That revelation alone told me more than the wanted circular. The Confederacy did not hand out field commissions to farm boys. Silas Vance had been someone, an officer of means, perhaps even a planter before the war. Men like that did not drift into the Colorado Territory with patched coats and empty pockets unless they had lost everything, unless they were hunted. The massacre in Missouri had a name I recognized: the Centralia Affair. Word of it had reached even our high valley in the autumn of '64. A band of Confederate bushwhackers under Bloody Bill Anderson had stopped a train, dragged out 24 unarmed Union soldiers, and executed them on the platform. Then they rode into the town of Centralia and killed more than 100 Federal troops in a single afternoon. The papers from Silas's bag did not place him at Centralia. They came from a different incident, a smaller, quieter slaughter of civilians near the Kansas border, but the pattern was clear. He had ridden with irregulars. He had been a partisan, and partisans did not survive by mercy. I rose before dawn. I pulled on my boots and my husband's old coat and walked to the barn with the papers folded in my pocket. Silas was already awake, standing at the stall door, brushing Judgment's flank with slow, methodical strokes. He did not turn when he heard my steps. "I wonder when you'd find them," he said. I stopped 10 feet from him, near enough to see the tension in his shoulders but far enough to run if I needed to. "You let me search your bag," I said. "You wanted me to find them." He set down the brush and faced me. In the low lantern light, his face looked older than I had realized, hollowed by more than travel. "I've been carrying those papers for 3 years," he said. "I've shown them to no one. But you have a right to know the truth about the man sleeping under your roof. I owed you that much before you let me near your boy another day." I pulled the wanted circular from my pocket and held it out. "Explain this." He looked at the paper but did not take it. "My name is Silas Vance," he said. "I was born in Virginia, the second son of a tobacco planter. I went to West Point in 1848, graduated 5th in my class, and served with the United States Army in Texas and the New Mexico Territory before the war. When Virginia seceded in '61, I resigned my commission and offered my service to the Confederacy. They gave me a regiment and sent me west to Missouri and Kansas to fight a war that had no rules." He paused. The wind rattled the barn door. "The massacre they want to question me about happened near a town called Fremont," he said. "I did not order it, I did not participate, but I was the commanding officer of the men who carried it out, and I did not stop them. I was wounded the morning before. They told me later they were securing the area. They lied to me. And 11 civilians died because I trusted the wrong subordinates." I stared at him. "You expect me to believe you were innocent?" "No," he said. "I expect you to believe that I have spent every day since then trying to wash blood from my hands that I cannot see but I know is there. I surrendered with my men at the end of the war. The Union took my parole, but the circular was issued a month later by a vengeful provost marshal who had lost a brother in one of the bushwhacker raids. He wanted someone to hang. He chose me. I felt the weight of the Springfield rifle leaning against the wall 10 feet away. I could reach it before he could reach me, but I did not move. "Why did you come here?" I asked. "Why this valley, this farm?" He looked past me toward the house where Samuel still slept. "Because the man who raised me after my own father died was a circuit preacher who spent his life in places like this. He told me that redemption was not a feeling. It was a debt you paid in small installments every day to people who did not know they were owed. I have been walking for 3 years looking for someone to pay that debt to. When I saw your son, I knew." I did not answer him. I could not. I walked back to the house and locked the door. All that morning I watched him from the window while I turned the facts over like stones in my palm. He was a Confederate officer. He was wanted by the Union. He had been complicit, at minimum, in the deaths of civilians. But he had also been truthful with me when he could have run. He had let me find the papers rather than hide them deeper. And my son, my Samuel, was outside with him at that very moment, carrying a small bucket of water to the horse. I knew I should send him away. I knew that harboring a wanted man could bring federal marshals to my door. In the Colorado Territory in 1868, the Army still had jurisdiction over unincorporated lands like this valley. If they found him here, they could arrest me as an accomplice. They could take Samuel. They could burn this farm. I had buried one husband already. I could not bear to lose everything he left behind, but I also knew that the man outside my window had not flinched when I asked for the truth. That mattered more than I wanted to admit. That evening I made my decision. I walked to the barn and found him mending a bridle by the lantern. "I'm not asking you to leave," I said. "Not yet, but I have conditions." He looked up, his hands still. "Name them." "You will tell me everything about Fremont. Every name, every detail, every choice you made. You will not touch a firearm on this land unless it is to defend this family. And you will never lie to my son. When he is old enough to ask, you will tell him the truth about who you were and what you did." He nodded slowly. "You have my word." "I don't yet know what your word is worth," I said, but we will find out. For 2 weeks the arrangement held. Silas worked the land and asked for nothing. He taught Samuel how to saddle a horse and how to read weather from the clouds. He never touched the pistol except to clean it in plain sight on the porch. I watched him like a hawk watches a snake, waiting for the strike that never came. But the outside world was closing in. I knew it before the rider appeared on the road. I felt it in the way the cattle grew restless and the dogs barked at nothing. Something was coming. And on the 15th morning after I found the papers, it arrived. A man in a blue cavalry coat rode into our yard with 2 deputies at his back. He was a federal marshal named Cyrus Tremont, and he carried a warrant with Silas Vance's name printed in block letters across the top. He dismounted and looked at the barn, then at me, then at the boy standing frozen by the chicken coop. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm looking for a fugitive, a Confederate officer wanted for murder. I have reason to believe he's been seen in this valley. Have you seen any strangers lately?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Behind me the barn door was closed. Silas was inside. Samuel's eyes met mine, wide with fear. I had seconds to decide whether to lie to a federal officer and risk everything I had left, or to give up the man who had promised to give my son the father war took. I stepped forward before the marshal could push past me. Every nerve in my body told me to look toward the barn, but I kept my eyes on his face. I had learned from my father that a lie only works if you deliver it like a gift you are happy to give. "No stranger here but the weather," I said, "and I'd send that packing if I could." Marshal Tremont studied me for a long, slow moment. He was a heavy man, thick across the shoulders, with a scar above his left eye that pulled the lid into a permanent squint. His blue coat was faded but clean, and the way his deputies flanked him told me he was used to people being afraid before he even opened his mouth. "Funny thing," he said. "A station keeper down at La Veta told me a man with a bay horse and a patch coat stopped there 3 weeks ago. Asked directions to the high valley where the widow keeps cattle alone. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. "I know most of the travelers who come through. I buy supplies from the trading post like everyone else. I don't recall any bay horse." The marshal's squint tightened. One of his deputies, a younger man with a face full of freckles, shifted his weight and glanced toward the barn. "Ma'am, we're going to need to look around your property," Tremont said. "For your own safety. A fugitive like Vance is a dangerous man. He wouldn't hesitate to harm a woman and child." It was a threat wrapped in concern, and we both knew it. I thought of Samuel behind me, small and silent, hearing every word. I thought of Silas, crouched in the dark of the barn with his hand on that cavalry pistol. "I don't consent to a search of my home," I said. "My husband died fighting for this country. His land is not free for any badge to trample." The marshal smiled, but it never reached his scarred eye. "Your husband died in a Union uniform, ma'am. That's exactly why I have the authority to search his land. The Territorial Act gives federal marshals jurisdiction on unincorporated homesteads when pursuing fugitives of war." He pulled a folded document from his coat and held it up. "This is a federal warrant. I don't need your consent." He pushed past me before I could block the door. The deputies fanned out, one toward the chicken coop, the other straight toward the barn. I followed Tremont into my own house, my heart slamming against my ribs. He walked through the kitchen, glanced at the cold stove, the single chair at the table, the ladder leading to the loft where Samuel slept. He saw the Springfield by the door and paused. "You keep a military rifle loaded," he said. "It was not a question. I have a son to protect. There are wolves in this country." "Yes," he said, "there are." He climbed the ladder without asking. I stood at the bottom, fists clenched, listening to his boots on the boards above. Samuel was not in the house. He was outside, somewhere near the corral. I prayed he had the sense to stay quiet. When Tremont came back down, his face was unreadable. "No one here," he said, as if he had expected to find the fugitive sitting at my kitchen table. He walked out into the yard just as his deputy emerged from the barn. "Nothing in the stalls," the freckled deputy called. "Some fresh manure, but no horse." I let out a breath I had not known I was holding. The bay horse judgment was not in the barn. Silas must have led him into the pine draw east of the pasture before dawn. He had done it without waking me. That meant he had seen the riders coming before I did. Marshal Tremont stood in the center of my yard, turning slowly, studying every fence post, every shadow. He stopped when his eyes landed on the woodpile. It was stacked high, split clean, the cuts still pale where the axe had bitten. He knelt and ran his thumb over a fresh split of pine. "You said you hadn't hired any help," he said quietly. I said nothing. The marshal straightened and walked to his horse. He swung into the saddle with a grunt and looked down at me from the height. His deputies mounted behind him. "Mrs. Hale," he said, using my name for the first time, and the fact that he knew it without me telling him sent a fresh chill through my blood. "I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt today, but I'll be camped at the La Veta station for the next 2 weeks. If Vance comes here, if you see anything, you send word. If I find out you've been harboring him, I'll charge you as an accessory to murder. Your boy will end up in a territorial orphanage, and this farm will be sold at auction. Do we understand each other?" I met his eyes. "We understand each other." He held my gaze a beat too long, then wheeled his horse and rode out with his deputies trailing dust behind him. I stood in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the wind. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the porch rail and made myself breathe. Samuel appeared from behind the chicken coop, his face pale, his eyes wet. He had hidden when I told him to. He had listened to the marshal threaten to take him away. He did not speak, but he threw his arms around my waist and held on tighter than he had since he was 3 years old. "It's all right," I whispered into his hair. "It's all right." It was not all right. Silas came back after dark, leading Judgment through the pine draw with muffled hooves. He had slept all day in a cave up the mountain, a place he had scouted the first week he arrived. When I saw him step out of the trees, I felt a rush of relief so powerful it frightened me. I had spent the day convincing myself I was relieved because it meant Samuel would not lose another man. But the truth was sharper and harder to swallow. I had been terrified for Silas himself. We sat at the kitchen table after Samuel was asleep. I poured coffee and told him everything the marshal had said. He listened without interrupting, his gray eyes fixed on the candle flame. "He won't stop," Silas said when I finished. "Tremont has been chasing me since '66. He's not a real marshal. He was appointed by a territorial judge after the real marshal died under suspicious circumstances. I don't have proof, but I believe he killed him." I stared at him. "Why would he do that?" Silas set down his cup. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent years holding a cavalry saber. "Because the real marshal had evidence that could have cleared my name. When he died, that evidence disappeared. Tremont isn't bringing me in for justice. He's bringing me in to silence me." I felt the floor shift beneath me. "You need to explain this to me," I said. "All of it, no more pieces." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. "The massacre near Fremont," he said. 11 civilians. I was the commanding officer, but I was not present. I had been shot in the thigh the morning before and was unconscious in a farmhouse 2 miles away. My second in command, a man named Harlan Cross, ordered the killings. Cross was a favorite of the local provost marshal, a man named John Tremont, Cyrus Tremont's older brother. The names fell into place like stones in a cairn. The marshal who wants you dead is the brother of the man who protected the real killer. Yes, and the real killer, Harlan Cross, died in 1865. He was killed by an unknown assailant on the road to Kansas City. The Army never solved the case. Silas paused, and I saw something dark pass behind his eyes. "I killed him. I tracked him for 8 months after the war ended, and when I found him, I put a bullet in his chest." The kitchen was very quiet. The candle flickered. I should have felt horror, but instead I felt a strange, terrible understanding. Silas Vance had not just failed to stop a massacre. He had executed the man responsible, and in doing so had made an enemy of a corrupt provost marshal who had covered it up. "You have a witness," I said slowly. "Someone who knows you were wounded and unconscious." I had a witness, a farm woman named Ida Rourke. She was the one who pulled the bullet from my leg. She gave a sworn statement to the real marshal, Lemuel Bryce. Bryce was murdered in Denver 2 months later, and Ida Rourke disappeared. I've been trying to find her ever since. "She's alive. I don't know." His voice cracked for the first time, a single break in the stone wall of his composure. "But I believe Tremont has her, or had her. If she's dead, there is no one left who can speak for me." I sat back in my chair and pressed my fingers to my temples. Outside, the wind was rising, the same dry rattle through the pines that always came before a storm. It felt like the whole world was tightening around this one small farm, this one small family. "What do we do?" I asked. Silas looked at me with something I had not seen in his eyes before, not resignation, but a fierce and quiet hope. "You don't do anything. I leave tonight. I draw Tremont away from this valley and I don't come back." And Samuel, the pain that crossed his face was real. "You tell him I was a drifter who moved on. He'll forget me. Children do." "No," I said. "They don't." We argued for another hour. He was stubborn as a mule and I was just as bad. In the end, we made no decision, only a truce to wait until morning. He went to the barn and I went to my bed, but neither of us slept. The next evening, the freckled deputy from Tremont's party rode back into the yard alone. He was holding a white handkerchief in one hand and looked like a boy who had been sent to deliver a message he did not believe in. I met him at the porch with the Springfield in my hands. "Ma'am," he said, "Marshal Tremont wants to make an offer. He says he knows Vance is here or has been here. He says if you turn him over by noon tomorrow, he'll drop any charge against you. He'll even pay a reward, $200. I looked at the deputy's face, his honest freckled boy's face, and I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was afraid of the marshal too. "Tell your marshal," I said, "that I don't take money for a man's life, and if he comes onto my land again without my consent, I'll treat him the same as any other predator who threatens my son." The deputy swallowed hard, nodded, and turned his horse. He rode away faster than he had come. Silas had heard the exchange from the barn. He came out as the dust settled. "He'll come back with more men," he said. "You know that." "I know." "Then why did you say no? $200 could buy you years of security. You could hire real help. You could send Samuel to school." I turned and faced him, and the words that came out were not the ones I had planned. "Because the day you walked into this yard, you told me you would give my son the father war took. I didn't believe you then. I thought it was a trade, a transaction. But you have done more for that boy in 3 weeks than any man has in 5 years. You taught him to track. You taught him to care for a horse. You showed him that a man can be broken and still stand. And I will not sell that, not for $200, not for anything." Silas stared at me. Then he did something I did not expect. He closed his eyes and his shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I met him, he looked like a man who had stopped running. "I don't deserve this," he said. "No one deserves anything," I said. "We just decide what we'll fight for." That night we began to prepare for the worst. I sent Samuel to stay with our nearest neighbors, the Larsons, 5 miles down the valley. I told them there was trouble coming, and I did not want the boy caught in it. Silas dug rifle pits behind the woodpile and the stone foundation of the house. We had the Springfield, his cavalry pistol, and a second revolver I had hidden under the floorboards. We had ammunition for maybe 30 shots. If Tremont brought more than 6 men, we would not hold for long. But there was something else, something I found while searching the barn for extra cartridges. In a false bottom of his saddlebag, behind the oilcloth and the papers I had already seen, Silas had hidden a small leather-bound journal. I opened it before I could think better of it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, dates and names and places. It was a record. A meticulous account of every man in the Fremont massacre, what they had done, who had ordered it, and the evidence that could convict them. It included testimony from Ida Rourke, copied in her own hand, and a letter from Lemuel Bryce before his death, stating that he had verified her account. Silas Vance had not been running from justice. He had been carrying it all this time, folded in a saddlebag and wrapped in oilcloth. He had been waiting for someone who could use it. I stood in the lantern light, the journal open in my hands, and I understood at last what kind of man I had let into my home. He was not a fugitive, he was a witness. And the marshal who wanted him dead was not hunting a killer, he was hunting the truth. When I showed Silas the journal, his face went still. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said. "If you had turned me in, that was going to be my insurance." I planned to give a copy to the territorial judge before Tremont could hang me. "Then we don't wait for Tremont to come," I said. "We take this to the judge ourselves, tomorrow at dawn." Silas shook his head. "The judge appointed Tremont. He's likely in the provost's pocket. If I walk into Denver with that book, I'll be shot before I reach the courthouse steps." I closed the journal and pressed it into his chest. "Then we find someone who can help." A lawyer, a newspaperman, a circuit preacher who knows the truth when he hears it. You have been carrying this alone for 3 years. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. He looked at me for a long, trembling moment. You would risk your farm, your son, your life for a man you barely know. I know you, I said. I know you by what you've done under my roof and what you've refused to do. That's enough. At dawn, a line of dust appeared on the eastern road. Tremont was coming back, and he was not coming alone. Through my husband's old field glasses, I counted 8 riders heavily armed. They had rifles, shotguns, and a coil of rope. They were not coming to arrest anyone. They were coming to hang us. Silas stood at my shoulder. He had shaved and put on his old cavalry coat, the one he rarely wore, the gray wool faded but still bearing the marks where his colonel's insignia had been torn off. The pistol was on his belt and the journal was inside his coat over his heart. If we run now, we might make the tree line before they see us, he said. We'd never outride them on one horse, and judgment can't carry all 3 of us even if we got Samuel back. He turned to me and his gray eyes were calm. Then I'll meet them in the yard. You stay inside. When it's over, you take the journal to the justice of the peace in Pueblo. His name is Arnes. He's honest. He'll know what to do. Grabbed his arm. You said you would give my son a father. That means you have to live. He covered my hand with his own. Some debts, he said, can only be paid in full. The riders were at the fence line now. I could see Tremont's scarred face, the freckled deputy looking sick, the others hard-eyed and hungry. I had 1 minute to decide whether to let the man I had come to love walk out to his death, or to stand beside him and turn my farm into a battlefield. I turned to Silas and took his hand. It was cold and calloused, and the same hand that had shown my son how to track deer in the soft ground. I did not want it to end here. We stand together, I said. Not in the yard with rifles. That is what he expects. We stand together with the truth, and we make him answer for it in front of his own men. Some of them are not killers. The freckled deputy, he is afraid. We give him a reason to break. Silas looked at me as if I had asked him to ride bareback into a cyclone. Then he nodded once. Give me the journal, I'll read from it. I pushed the leather book into his hands. Then I walked into the yard with the Springfield held across my body, barrel down, and Silas walked beside me with the journal open. The 8 riders had formed a line just inside the fence. Marshal Tremont sat his horse at the center, the coil of rope hanging from his saddle horn. His scarred eye gleamed in the morning light. That's far enough, Tremont called. Lay down that rifle, Mrs. Hale. We're here for Vance. You step aside and you and your boy walk away clean. I did not lay down the rifle. I planted the stock in the dirt and kept my voice steady. You're not a real marshal, Cyrus Tremont. You were appointed by a corrupt judge to cover up a massacre. The real marshal, Lemuel Bryce, was murdered because he had evidence that would have cleared this man's name. And I have that evidence right here. Silas raised the journal. His voice carried, deep and calm. This is the sworn testimony of Ida Rourke, the woman who treated my wounds the day of the Fremont massacre. It states that I was unconscious miles from the village when the killings occurred. It states that my second-in-command, Harlan Cross, gave the order and that your brother, Provost Marshal John Tremont, protected Cross in exchange for a cut of the loot. I killed Cross after the war, and your brother sent you to kill me. The posse stirred. Horses shifted. The freckled deputy's face went pale. The others glanced at one another. Tremont's jaw clenched. He had not expected this. He had expected a gunfight, a quick hanging, a story he could control, not the whole truth read aloud in a widow's yard. That book is a forgery, he spat. And that woman Rourke is dead. You can't prove anything. But his voice had lost its certainty. I saw the freckled deputy's hands trembling on his reins. Marshal, he said, you told us Vance was a murderer. You never said anything about a witness. Shut your mouth, Tremont snarled. I stepped forward. Ida Rourke is not dead. She's alive, and she's been hiding in Pueblo under the protection of Justice of the Peace Arnes. I received word this morning from the Larsons. She gave her testimony to a federal judge 2 days ago. The army is already on its way to arrest you. I was lying through my teeth, but I said it with the absolute conviction of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Silas did not flinch. He had learned to read me in the past weeks, and he played along. Tremont's face twisted. He yanked his revolver from his belt and leveled it at me. You're lying. I'll put a bullet in you and that traitor both. Before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out from the tree line. It struck the ground in front of Tremont's horse, sending the animal rearing. Tremont fought for control, and when he steadied, there were 8 more rifles aimed at his back. The Larsons had come down from the ridge, and with them were half the homesteaders from the valley, men I knew from trading posts and Sunday meetings, men who had kept their distance when my husband died but had never forgotten the debt they owed a Union soldier's widow. At their front stood Samuel, my 9-year-old boy, holding a hunting rifle taller than he was, his face set like stone. He had not stayed at the Larsons. He had raised the alarm. The freckled deputy was the first to drop his weapon. He slid off his horse and raised his hands. "I'm done, Marshal. I didn't sign up for killing women." One by one, the other men followed. They had come for a hanging, not a war. Tremont looked around at the rifles trained on him, at the deputy he had bullied into obedience now standing against him, at the widow and the drifter who had refused to break. He let out a curse and threw down his revolver. "This isn't over," he said. "It is for now," I said. The homesteaders bound Tremont to his saddle and sent a rider to Pueblo for the territorial judge. That rider carried the journal, copied twice over by the light of a dozen lanterns that night. Within 3 days, a federal marshal, a real one, arrived with a company of cavalry. They took Tremont into custody and exhumed the records of Lemuel Bryce's murder. The cover-up unraveled in weeks. John Tremont was posthumously stripped of his rank. The judge who had appointed Cyrus was impeached. And Ida Rourke, who had indeed been alive and hiding in Pueblo under a false name, came forward to give her testimony in person. I will never forget the morning she arrived at our farm. She was a small woman, gray-haired and stooped, with burned scars on her hands from the winter she spent hiding in a mining camp. She walked straight up to Silas and put her hand on his cheek. "I wondered if you'd made it," she said. "When they killed Marshal Bryce, I thought they'd kill you too." Silas, who had not wept in all the months I had known him, closed his eyes and let the tears fall. The inquiry cleared Silas Vance of all charges. The army restored his right to hold land, and the territorial governor issued a formal apology. He was offered a commission in the regular army, but he turned it down. He said he had a farm to run. Our farm. We married in the autumn of '69, under the maple tree where the branch had fallen and nearly crushed me. Samuel stood beside Silas as his best man, proud as any boy could be. The justice of the peace Arnis performed the ceremony, and Ida Rourke served as witness. When the vows were spoken and the rings exchanged, Silas knelt in front of Samuel and said, "I am not your first father, and I will never try to replace him. But if you'll have me, I will be your second, for as long as I live." Samuel threw his arms around him and said, "I've had a father all along. I was just waiting for you to get here." That winter, the farm prospered in ways I had never imagined. Silas knew irrigation techniques from his time out west before the war, and we doubled the yield of the pasture. The cattle herd grew. We added a new room to the house and a proper school desk for Samuel. In the evenings, Silas read to us from books he ordered by mail: Dickens, Shakespeare, and a well-worn Bible that no longer had a bullet hole through Psalms. That Bible had belonged to my first husband, and I had put it away after his death because I could not bear to touch it. Silas found it in the chest and asked permission to repair the cover. He used horse glue and a piece of saddle leather, and when he gave it back to me, he had inscribed a new verse on the inside page in his careful West Point hand. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalms 34, verse 18. The same psalm that bullet had pierced. I asked him once, late at night when the fire burned low, if he had ever stopped believing he was damned. He looked into the flames for a long time before he answered. "I stopped believing it the night you stood in my barn with those papers in your hand and did not turn me in. I knew then that redemption was possible, not because I deserved it, but because you chose to give it." Those words have stayed with me through all the years since. There is one more thing. A detail I have never told anyone outside this valley. The freckled deputy, the young man who broke first when Tremont threatened me, his name was Eli Rourke. He was Ida's son. Tremont had forced him into service by threatening his mother's life, and Eli had spent 2 years feeding information to the justice of the peace in secret, waiting for the right moment to turn. When he saw me standing in the yard with the journal, he knew the moment had come. He later became a deputy marshal himself, one of the honest ones, and Samuel still writes to him every Christmas. So you see, the drifter who walked into my yard that spring with a silence heavier than words did not just give my son a father. He gave a family back to a woman who had written her name out of the book of the living. He gave a purpose to a young man trapped in a corrupt system. He gave justice to 11 dead civilians whose names might otherwise have been forgotten. And he gave me something I had stopped believing in the day the letter came from Chickamauga. He gave me a future. I almost refused him. I almost sent him on his way with a meal and a warning. But he glanced past me at my barefoot boy, and he said that quiet, broken sentence that changed everything. Let me stay. I'll give your son the father war took. I left the barn door unlatched that night, and by morning nothing was the same. By the grace of God, it never will be again. I am an old woman now. The farm has passed to Samuel's hands and his sons after him, and the wheat still turns gold every October. Silas rests under the maple tree where we exchanged our vows. I will join him there soon. But before I go, I wanted to tell you this story, not because it is unique, but because it is not. The war that took my John left 1,000,000 doors with a missing figure in the frame. Behind each one, a woman stood making the same brutal calculation I did. Do I trust the stranger? Do I let my child hope again? Do I risk the little I have left for the chance of something more? Some sent the drifter away and spent the rest of their lives wondering. Others, like me, left the latch open and discovered that broken men can still build whole families. Silas never forgot what he had done, nor did he ever pretend he had washed it clean. But he learned that a man is not only the worst thing he has ever been. He is also every small, decent choice he makes afterward. The Colorado Territory is a state now, stitched into the Union like a scar healed over. The high valley where I stood with a rifle and a lie is crisscrossed by roads and telephone wires. But the question remains the same, echoing down every generation. What do you do when someone arrives carrying more shadow than sunlight? Do you bolt the door, or do you ask him to stay? I have no easy answer. I only know that when I looked into Silas Vance's gray eyes that first evening, I saw a reflection of my own brokenness. Two cracked vessels cannot mend each other, but they can hold water together if they are willing to lean. If you take one thing from this old woman's story, let it be this. The father war took from my son was a man of honor who died for a cause he believed in. The father war gave him was a man of shame who spent the rest of his days proving he could be something better. Samuel never confused the two. He loved them both, and that capacity to love widely shaped him into a man who now raises his own children with the same open door I learned to leave unlatched. Thank you for sitting with me through the long telling. If my story reached you, then Silas did not walk all those miles in vain. And if you want to hear more stories like this, true tales from the forgotten corners of history, then please subscribe to this channel. There are more doors to open, and I would be honored to walk you through them.